Good morning. My name is Steve Garfield. I am the President and CEO of the Information Technology Industry Council, which is a collection of the global leaders in information communication technology, along with the foundation, the Information Technology Innovation Foundation, as well as the Digital Energy Solutions Campaign. I'd like to welcome all of you to this event this morning on the role that energy innovation can play in advancing our national security as well as military preparedness. I'm sure all of you have been to a number of events where there's long conversations, everyone leaves the room, and nothing happens. This is not that type of event. We've put together all of the essential elements for making sure that today's work and discussion is followed by real action. So turning our rhetoric into reality. We'll start by hearing with two members of Congress who provided exceptional leadership on these issues of innovation, energy innovation in particular, and the role that it can play in advancing national security and military preparedness. We'll start in a second with Chairman Randy Forbes, and then move on to Senator Mark Udall. An essential part of this is, of course, the military as well, the Department of Defense. We all know that the Department of Defense has been really a leader in developing technologies that advance and improve all of our lives as well as improve the economy. If you've ever flown in a plane, used GPS, or been on that thing known as the internet, that you benefited from the work of the Department of Defense. Of course, we represent private sector companies and feel that we have a small role to play in this as well. Those of you who have driven a Tesla car, for example, as we at a reception the other night at the Tesla showroom, has seen some of the advances that our advanced battery technologies the difference that it can make. And those sorts of technologies will have real benefits for the military as well. Or whether it's collaborative technologies like cloud computing that can also advance our energy security and military preparedness, as well as our national security. And so we have a lot to do. I know that both members of Congress who are here this morning have busy schedules. I was just talking with Congressman Chairman Forbes that I'm going to follow him around given his hearing schedule alone today. Chairman Forbes is really, I could think of no two better people to kick this event off. Both have a legacy of leadership around this issue. Chairman Forbes has been working on this for an exceptionally long time. He's now the chair of the Preparedness Subcommittee, and in fact, years ago, called for a Manhattan Project focused on collaboration between the Department of Defense, and really advancing our energy security. So without further ado, I invite Congressman Forbes to come on.
It's a pleasure for me to be here with all of you and with Senator Udall and the great work that he does. And Senator, it's great to be here with you. And I'm going to be very brief because, as mentioned, I have a little hearing on Libya that's going to start in about 7 or 8 minutes, and I've got to be there when the gavel goes down. But I want to just give you this picture. I want to thank you for what you're doing and tell you that what we do with energy and technology is so crucial to everything we do with readiness for our military. We use two touchstones, and they're pretty simple. It's not how many jobs it creates. It's not how much money it puts in a particular district. It is whether or not you are able, with the technology and the research you do, to save us dollars, because that's crucial for us so that we can buy the equipment and do the things we need and make sure our men and women are the best prepared in all the world. And secondly, whether you help us create a more secure environment, because if we're not having to transport energy, I have less people out there exposed to enemy fire, and also to help us with our operational effectiveness. And that's what you have the capability of doing in this room. And we thank you for that. And I want to just give you one other overlay, because there's so much that I'd love to sit down and talk to you about, whether it is the new Manhattan Project and the opportunities we have with energy, or some of the exciting things that you're doing. But I want to give you this overlay. We are not very good as a nation in developing strategies. And that includes strategies related to energy. We're pretty good at doing them on a 6-month basis, but we're not good at doing them 5, 10, 15 years, and we've got to do a better job of that. And that's what you can help us do when it comes to energy. Let me give you one quick example. There was a scenario that took place that some of you might recognize. It was a Sunday morning. The sun was probably somewhat like it was today. In Oahu, many of our men and women had just celebrated Saturday night in the way that our military folks oftentimes celebrate Saturday nights. They were recovering on Sunday morning. We had a handful of people that were actually policing Oahu for us. At that time, we had our battleships lined up in a row on Battleship Alley, and we had a fleet that was steaming up to the north of Oahu. They were just inside some rain squalls that were taking place, but they were just outside the commercial shipping so that nobody could pick them up and our planes would not pick them up. As they reached Oahu, they launched 3 types of planes: fighter planes, torpedo planes, and bombers. Those planes headed for Oahu, and just as they did, the sun cleared up so that they could have an horizon to come in on. And they came in and dropped all of the ordnance that they had planned to drop. Our men scurried to get into their planes, and by the time they got in, all the attack planes had left. Our planes landed back on the field, and as they did, a second wave came in and completed the task that the first wave started. And if I asked you, does that scenario, do any of you recognize it? Most of you would immediately say, what? Pearl Harbor. That wasn't Pearl Harbor. That was a war game that we did 10 years before Pearl Harbor in 1932, where Admiral Yarnell predicted exactly what would happen at Pearl Harbor. He dropped flour on the ships as opposed to bombs. And the Department of Defense came in and said, no, 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 we're throwing that game out because you attacked on Sunday, and no one would ever attack on Sunday. We can't afford to miss those kind of strategies, whether we're looking at energy or anything else pertaining to national defense. We've got to be looking ahead. We've got to be forging the kind of strategies that will defend freedom around the world. You are a part of that, and we thank you for what you're doing and the part that you're paying to that component. And that's what we're going to be focusing on. Our door is open to you. I thank you for being here, and thanks for letting us just be a small part of this today.
Thank you, Congressman Forbes. Next we have Senator Mark Udall. On his bio, it says he's a senior senator from Colorado. I would like to say he's a more experienced senator from Colorado. He has a long bio. The one thing I'll highlight, rather than running through the whole thing, is that in 2010 he introduced a bill where there was really truth in naming that exemplified his leadership in this area, which was the Department of Defense Energy Security Bill of 2010. He introduced that bill with Gabby Gifford. We're all hoping that when she comes back to the Congress, that they will again reintroduce that bill, and this time it will pass. With that, Senator Mark Udall.
Thank you, Dean. Good morning to all of you. And you did have to rub in the senior senator. I still don't know what that means, but I was thinking about you also talking about how Congressman Forbes has worked exceptionally long on these sets of opportunities for us. And I'm thinking his children probably think he's exceptionally old, just like mine do. But maybe that's tied to the senior senator moniker. But it's great to be over on the House side. I served over here for 10 years. There's a lot to like about the House, including the fact that the egos over here are more balanced. You can't filibuster. And when I was in the majority, I really loved the Rules Committee. I don't know if I love the Rules Committee right now as we speak, but we're here to discuss something that has to do with America, with making our country more secure, and in the end, that really has nothing to do with our political parties. And in particular, when you look at the DoD's history, I want to tell you all here, but it's been one of innovation. We developed the radar, the internet. I was reminded, somebody said that's a bunch of tubes, right? But I think it's a lot more than that. A GPS, just think about the simple move to from natural rubber to synthetic rubber that occurred in the Second World War. That list goes on and on and on and on. And now we've tasked the DoD with a new challenge, and that's securing our energy future. As Congressman Forbes mentioned, the DoD knows this well because the demand on the DoD when it comes to energy supplies is immense, and we know the cost. But we also know that there are a lot of opportunities for the DoD to reduce energy consumption, diversify the way in which we fuel our efforts, and also incorporate renewable energy technologies going forward. You mentioned, Dean, that I work with Congressman Giffords, and we all are sending every possible amount of good energy and prayers to her and her family. We really do hope she's going to be back. And I am going to reintroduce the legislation that she and I worked on in the last Congress, the Department of Energy Security Act. It's very simple, very to the point. It will be updated. Gabby's been an enormously effective partner on this, and I know we're going to get her back here as soon as she possibly is able to be back here. Let me just tell you a little bit about the legislation. I too am going to exit the stage because we've got the experts here, and I hopefully can stay for a few minutes and listen a little bit and learn something. Amazing how much you learn when you listen. This legislation aims to reduce the Pentagon's reliance on oil on the battlefield, tasks the DoD to better plan for its energy use, increase electricity consumption at military bases, and increase the independence, if you will, of our military bases by increasing the development of on-site electricity use. The effect of the legislation would be something very simple but very elegant, which would be to improve the security of our troops abroad and our defense assets at home while reducing the cost of the American taxpayer. I really like that. That's at the center of our mission. So I look forward to working with all of you on this piece of legislation and on this broader mission that we have that's so vitally important to our Department of Defense, our security, and all that we will do. So again, thank you, along with Congressman Forbes, for the work you're putting forth. This is really going to make a difference. Have a great day. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Senator Udall. We're actually using technology to extend the effectiveness of and the reach of this event. It's being streamed live on the internet. We also have, through our collaboration with Desk, we're going to be taking a poll that tests the attitudes of the general public around this issue, partnership between Desk and Facebook. We'll talk more about that before the event is over. We'll now transition to the panel so we can, as Senator Udall said, all start learning about this important issue. I would like to bring up Dr. Rod Atkinson. You know, Dr. Atkinson is someone who doesn't need much of an introduction. He is more prolific on a wide range of issues than anyone I know. He's the president and founder of the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, and fortunately enough, a good friend, someone, and there are very few people I look up to, both figuratively but
Only one problem, though, Dean, I think, could easily whip me when it comes to basketball.
That's true.
I can't even dunk anymore, so welcome, everybody. I think this should be a really great panel. I'm just going to do very, very quick introductions. But just to frame this, I think, you may not know this, I think in the last year and a half, ITIF has emerged, certainly I think as a leading voice on clean energy innovation. We've done a lot of work on that. My colleague Matt Horahan and Matt Stepp have been leading that work, and as part of that, we're releasing a report today, which is on the back table there, Lean, Mean, and Clean, that discusses the role of DoD in energy innovation and why it's so central. So I'm going to start by just going down the list here. I'm going to start with my colleague Sharon Burke. This is a little bit, for those of you who are old enough to remember this acronym, it's a little bit like old OTA Home Week. OTA, it used to be a congressional agency like CBO, and was eliminated in '95, but Sharon and Dorothy and I were all at OTA back in the good old days, so it was really nice to have a little reunion here and to see that if there is life after OTA. Sometimes we weren't sure that would be the case. So Sharon Burke is the Assistant Secretary for Operation Energy Plans and Programs in DoD. She's been in that position since June 2010. In this position, she's the principal advisor to the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary on operational energy security, and she reports to the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition Technology and Logistics. She's also the first Assistant Secretary in this position, and it's a new position that was created to strengthen the energy security of the U.S. military. Sharon has a really long and distinguished background. I'm not going to read it all, but she was Vice President and Senior Fellow at the Center for a New American Security. She was on the policy planning staff at the Department of State. She was a speechwriter for Deputy Secretary of State Richard Armitage and Secretary of Defense William Cohen. As I mentioned, she was in the Energy and Material Program at OTA and has won a number of awards, including Exceptional Public Service Award at DoD. Next is Dorothy Robine. Dorothy is the Deputy Undersecretary for Installations and Environment at DoD. She's held that position since July of 2009. And in that position, she provides management and oversight of military installations worldwide and manages environmental safety, occupational health programs, and responsibilities include energy issues in DoD. She also, prior to that, was a principal with the Brattle Group, which was an economic consulting group, and prior to that, I think we're probably the only person in the administration who was from there beginning to end, besides President Clinton, and I guess Al Gore. So from 93 to 2001, Dorothy served as Special Assistant to the President for Economic Policy and a Senior Staff member at the NEC. And in that position, she dealt a lot with DoD and DoD technology issues. She also was a former professor at Harvard Kennedy School of Government and has a PhD at UC Burke. Next is Tim Soames, who is the General Manager for the Department of Defense at Microsoft. Prior to that position, he was with VMware, where he was responsible for sales and management for DoD, and prior to that was at Dell in the federal business practice. Has a long background with the military. He's also had a career in the United States Army as an attack aviator, serving in command and staff positions, and also as a volunteer pilot for Angel Flight and Veterans Aircraft Command, which flies wounded soldiers from home to other activities. And next is Phillip Bernstein.
That's good. I thought I could go now.
Yeah. Well, actually, your bio is all sort of 3D CAD visual file. It's a holographic, and that actually isn't Phil.
I'm a simulation of Phil.
It's like the doctor on Star Trek. If you've ever seen Autodesk technology, it's actually not all that far-fetched. Phil is Vice President of Autodesk, which, if those of you don't know, Autodesk is a leading provider of software for architecture and engineering. They do 3D modeling. It's pretty amazing. He's also a practicing architect with 25 years experience. He heads the industry strategy relations for the AEC division of Autodesk. And he just really has a long and distinguished background as an architect. He taught at Yale School of Architecture. He's designed major buildings that you all know, and then most importantly, he had an article in Manager Care at one point, which hopefully has something to do with architecture.
Madonna on the cover.
Yeah. But some more switching Wall Street Journal, Fortune, wide array of companies, widely respected in the architecture field. And last but not least, Matt Horahan, who is, as I said, a clean energy policy analyst at ITIF. Prior to joining ITIF, he was the Jan Shore Business Fellow at the Business Council for Sustainable 100. So what we're going to do is we're going to go with Matt first with just a 5-minute overview. What's the conceptual overview, why we're talking about this, and then we'll go after that.
Thank you, Rob. So I just want to take a few minutes and kind of frame the issue conceptually from an innovation perspective. We've heard about the challenges and opportunities facing DoD in the realm of energy technology. It's important to remember that energy is a dual-use technology fundamentally. What that means is that it has both military and civilian uses. Not to say that your portable solar-powered rucksack or a bioenergy-fueled fighter jet obviously has civilian uses, but components of those systems, the sort of pieces that you take and use in civilian, private sector context in the energy space. So what that means is that DoD's movement into the energy technology realm, and further movement in that realm, potentially has some big upside for those of us outside the civilian sector, commercial energy sector. And a lot of this upside isn't going to be realized by DoD setting out to solve the nation's energy problems or anything like that. It can simply be realized by DoD setting out to solve DoD's energy problems. There's actually, as we heard from the Senator, there's a pretty long history of DoD doing just this in a range of technology realms in terms of development, from internet, computing, development of the jet engine, and the upshot being that in a lot of these areas, DoD is able to focus technology development efforts on strategic goals and thus lead to spin-offs, et cetera. So this is not about DoD doing anything but doing what DoD needs to do. Now, how has DoD been successful typically in kind of facilitating this technology development process, facilitating this innovation? It might be useful to think of the Department of Defense as almost a self-contained kind of innovation cycle or innovation system in some ways. There are two kind of fundamental functions that you need to have in any kind of innovation system. You need a process by which you can generate a variety of technologies, and you need a process to select those technologies and scale them up and amplify them. The technology generation process, a lot of that deals with the R&D, distributed networks, collaboration, feedbacks, and those lines. And DoD has historically been able to perform a lot of this work and sustain a lot of this work. Then kind of the second half is dealing with selection. Part of that is translation from the lab to the market, and part of that process is testing. Again, DoD has some pretty rigorous standards that technology needs to meet to be able to perform in the field, and they're already setting themselves up to be a test bed in energy technology currently. And then lastly, you need to have some kind of a selection process that amplifies that technology. Now, in the market, or in the commercial sector, obviously, this selection and scale-up happens in the market decision processes. DoD represents a self-contained, very large early market for a lot of emerging technologies. For example, microchips. DoD was a major buyer, early buyer in the 60s and 70s for chips, and that allowed performance improvements and cost decreases, and helped to kind of provide a foothold in a lot of ways for industry, and help to strengthen industry. So by testing new technologies and applying rigorous standards, DoD is well positioned to scale them up to achieve those strategic mission goals, and kind of facilitate that scale up and learning process that then is able to spell out into the private sector. So I guess maybe there's really kind of two fundamental goals I guess I see for policy in this realm. Number one is to ensure that DoD has adequate innovative capacity internally to ensure that there are processes that can generate new knowledge, new learning, new options, new varieties of technology, test them, scale them up. But just as important is ensuring that there's adequate innovative capacity outside of the department. Because historically, the most successful activities, processes, and ventures have been a result of collaboration with other agencies, with private industry, with academia. So ensuring that there is innovative capacity with which DoD can work. You're basically ensuring, number one, that you have actors, entities, institutions that can serve to help to generate that technology supply. But we've also got institutions that can then take technologies that have been through the scale-up process and absorb them and convert them into the private market. So that's sort of, I think, how I think we would think about a lot of these issues. So.
Great. Thank you, Matt. A couple of things, by the way. We will end no later than 10:30 on the dot, so, and we should have plenty of time for questions and discussion for you all. Last point, there are a couple of chairs in here, so there's a lot of folks in the back. come on up, or if you're sort of on the edge, if you don't mind moving in a bit, we have plenty of room for folks. There's some chairs up here as well. So, Sharon.
Okay. Thank you, Rob. And as you say, it's great to see that there's life after OTA for everyone but OTA itself. So it brings back old memories of what's going on right now, doesn't it? I think one of the nice things about this event, other than just it's a great study and a great organization, is the way that we opened with two members of Congress doing the introduction. And I think right away the message that they sent is that the Department of Defense has a lot of support for what it's trying to do to improve its energy security. And that support is bipartisan and it's bicameral. And what you heard from these members is they're not just interested in this, but they're also informed and they're invested. So it's important to know, because I know there's a lot of focus now on where things are contentious and not working, that we have a lot of support to move ahead. And that means a lot. It was great to hear that from the members. I'm just going to walk you quickly through what I want to say and then move on to the panel. First, just quickly profile the nature of the defense energy challenge and why we need innovation in the energy space, and also why we're well positioned to take advantage of that kind of innovation. And I'd say the bottom line is that the Department of Defense's energy use has strategic and tactical consequences and the potential for great strategic advantage. And investments in energy security, and I'm talking about military energy security, will lower the risk to our troops and improve our military effectiveness and reduce our costs. So the scale of the defense energy challenge, as I believe Senator Udall pointed out, we are the largest consumer in the world of fuel. We consume, I believe it's about 160 million barrels of oil equivalent each year, about 300,000 barrels of oil a day. Last year, it was about $15.4 billion, our fuel bill was. And the distinction between, and it's a little bit of a term of art, operational energy, but we'll make it simple. I mean, DoD to some extent is a business like any other business, or an enterprise like any other enterprise, and everything we do requires energy. We use energy for everything. And that's our day-to-day business, our facilities, the way we work, but also we're a business like no other in what our business is. And our business of protecting the country, our national security mission, is military operations, and that's operational energy, the energy it actually takes to support military operations. That accounts for 75% of our energy use, so it is where most of our fuel is going. That particular space has been outside of regulations and laws and mandates for obvious reasons, because it is related to actual military operations. But my office was created by an act of Congress in 2009, and the demand signal really came from deployed forces. And it was the current Central Command Commander, General Jim Mattis, who said when he came back from Afghanistan and Iraq in the 2004 timeframe, unleash us from the tether of fuel. The amount of fuel that we use and the kind of fuel that we use has become a constraint on our operations, and it's also putting our forces at risk. People are dying moving fuel around these battlefields because our logistics, our supply line is very vulnerable in this current fight. And it goes beyond that. The energy we use to control the skies, to steam the seas, all of it, that tether is so big now that it's become a liability. So that is, in general, in terms of the scale of the problem. Now, to put it in context about why we need innovation in this space, it always comes back to, and I think what Matt said is very important. This is for DoD's needs. Why do we need to change the way we use energy? It's because of what our mission is. If you look at the national security strategy and the department's own strategic guidance in the national military strategy, the quadrennial defense review, we're a very busy military force, and we're going to continue to be busy. We have a global mission. We need to be able to move rapidly around the world. We have a great variety of threats and challenges we need to be able to respond to, a great variety of missions we need to be able to undertake. If you just take a slice of what we're doing right now, there's disaster and humanitarian relief in Japan on a really significant scale. There are military operations that are counterinsurgency related, that are air combat. We're involved in very diverse missions. We're doing routine exercises with partners all over the world that are important for deterrence, for stability, for building confidence with our partners and allies. All of these things are what we are expected to do and will continue to be expected to do. And they all require a great deal of energy. And that's is going to increasingly be a problem and be a challenge for us in executing that mission, both because of the size of that tether and the fact that it's a tactical vulnerability, and because of the larger questions about what's going on in global oil supply, demand, markets, because our operational fuel is overwhelmingly oil, petroleum fuels. Right now in Afghanistan, we're consuming somewhere around 50 million gallons of fuel a month. It's mostly jet fuel. And that the larger dimensions of the problem, the geostrategic challenge, puts us in a longer term challenge there as far as keeping those supplies going. The National Security Strategy notes that the challenges to our energy security are going to continue to undermine security and prosperity at a national level. And that is going to be visited on the Department of Defense too. And of course, the way we use energy as a nation shapes geopolitics. Geopolitics shape our energy use. And that, of course, is people at the Department of Defense are highly aware of that because it also affects our missions. At an operational level, we first of all require a huge force structure in order to move fuel around. The Navy has oilers, the Air Force has tankers, including a wonderful new tanker. The Army has HEMTs. It takes a lot of infrastructure to move that much fuel to the point of the fight. It also takes a lot of infrastructure to protect it when it's in a contested area. And in fact, adversaries in Iraq and Afghanistan have targeted and attacked U.S. and NATO supply lines and fuel supply convoys. And as Rod was pointing out earlier, this is not the first time it happens. Logistics are always a target at the time of war. It's just that with the kinds of wars we're in right now, our logistics are in the battlefield more than they commonly would be. We have to put more dollars and more troops on force protection for supply lines. We've done some cost estimates, and just getting fuel to the last tactical mile, where we've got people engaged in the fight, can be very expensive. And when you talk about all that force protection and the fact that we have to fly some of it or move it under fire, it can be anywhere from $10 to $50 a gallon for us as a real cost, as a fully burdened cost. So how are we responding to this? Well, the military services all have energy strategies. They have targets and metrics that they are seeking to meet. They have taken action. They have not waited. The Army has insulated thousands of square feet of tents in Iraq and in Afghanistan. The Marine Corps has the experimental forward operating base. They have Marines that are under fire. Actually, the company's just come back, but they had Marines who are under fire in Helmand Province who are using insulated tent liners, high-efficiency lights, solar power, to get them off that supply line. And in fact, they were successfully able to do that, also with solar recharging batteries, because the batteries actually, again, our capabilities have changed so much. And how much energy an individual Marine or soldier uses in the battle is radically different from the way it was 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago. And getting that energy to them at the point of the fight is very difficult. And the Marines have been testing these again, not because they want to advance the solar industry, although that would be a happy outcome, but because they want their Marines to be able to conduct their missions. They want them to have the range and the endurance, and they want them to have the independence from the supply line to get done what they need to get done. And they want to put the Marines that would have had to protect the supply lines moving the batteries and the fuel somewhere else. And they've had a great success there. It's a terrific demonstration of what's possible. The Navy has done some great experimentation in efficiency, including with hybrid electric drive on ships. They also are looking at alternative supplies. We have legacy fleets that have been around for a long time. We need to make sure that our forces have fuel now and 10, 20, 40, 50 years into the future, when we know there's going to be far more difficulty getting oil where it needed to be. The Air Force is also testing alternative fuels and making changes to improve their efficiency. And I should point out that innovation is not all technological, it's also in practices and in processes, which is very important. We're making significant gains there as well in how we actually do business. The broad areas of focus for the department going forward, and I'll just wrap it up, are to improve our end use of energy, because we use more than we need to. As I said, the Army is insulating tents because right now we're moving huge amounts of fuel to put in generators that are not being run very efficiently to cool tents. And we can do this better, and we are doing it better. We need to expand our range of supplies and also the security of our supplies. One area that Dorothy and I work on a great deal together is at facilities, there are fixed installations in the United States and around the world that directly support military operations. And the security of their electricity, of course they all use electricity from the civilian grid, and the security of that supply is critical to those military operations. And so that is part of expanding our supply, is getting the security of that lined up. But then also, one of the bigger challenges too is that the trend lines, we're using more fuel than we ever have before, and that trend line is going straight up. So we are building a force that's going to be even more energy consuming and energy intense. So we need to get into how the department builds the future force. Our strategy and planning, I think Congressman Forbes mentioned wargaming, and in fact my office has been bringing energy considerations into some of the wargaming that the department does. So wargaming strategy, planning, requirements definition, which is how the department decides what it needs, the acquisition process. We actually have to take what we're learning in theater now about the vulnerabilities of our reliance on these volumes of oil and this kind of energy and get it into how we're building the future force. And we're doing that. And just, a closing word about why the department is so well positioned to take advantage of innovation. As a consumer, we certainly have an opportunity to push. We have big budgets, we have a command and control infrastructure, and I know that attracts a lot of attention, and we certainly are able to bring that and also our larger national security mission to play for larger national goals. But where our real power and suasion is, and Matt really, I think, got to this well, is that we have a mission that's absolutely essential for the nation that we must conduct. We have a national security mission, and we need to use energy differently and use different energy in order to conduct that mission. And there's a lot of power in seeding our need for innovation and that pull for innovation in the defense mission. And as Matt said, we've done it before in a number of places. Just quickly, that I also want to mention that we're also well positioned to do this in partnership in the ways that Matt mentioned, and I see a colleague, Mike Smith from the Department of Energy here. We're working very hard to figure out how to leverage the expertise that the Department of Energy has with the requirements the Department of Defense has. And the partnership with the private sector and our agency partners is very important. In basic R&D, we're going to be looking at power generation and distribution, energy conversion, energy storage, advanced fuels. We're demonstrating already cutting-edge materials, including for tents and other things, thin film solar for battery recharging. These are things we're already testing, evaluating, and demonstrating. And we're procuring more efficient generators, microgrid for load management, including in a tactical environment. My office has also been charged with establishing an innovation fund to focus energy innovation across DoD, from basic R&D and demonstration to procurement. And one of the goals of this fund is to strengthen that link between military requirements and the broader innovation opportunities, because again, we're not an energy company, we don't make energy, we don't necessarily excel in reaching out to that community. And so we want to strengthen that link between military requirements and energy innovation, also get some better internal coordination, because there are a lot of places where on the operational side, since traditionally we haven't looked at that as a separate capability, where the military services can leverage each other's investments, and we use this fund to do that, and also to tie it to strategy. And that's the last thing I'll say is that my office is charged by law to produce a strategy for the department, and it'll be out. It's in final coordination right now, and we do want to key this fund also to those strategic goals, so that we're putting the investment for where our goals are. So that's a quick overview, and happy to turn it over to my colleague, Burke.
Thanks a lot. I'm actually in a much better mood after I listened to you than before, because I'm really encouraged by all that you're doing. It's really great. I'm sure we're all looking for a strategy as well. You have an idea when that's going to be released for the public?
It is up to the tender mercies of the coordination process, which is actually really important, because it's when all the military services and the players in the department have a chance to see this, shape it, and own it. But it can take a while. I think we're nearing the end, so we hope that it'll be out in April.
Good, thank you.
Thanks, Rob. So I worry about installations here and abroad. We have a very large footprint. We have a very large carbon footprint, if you will. We have 500 installations at 5,000 sites. We have 300,000 buildings. A lot of those are small, but many of them are big, and it's an extremely diverse inventory of buildings, everything from limb hangers to data centers to office buildings, barracks, and everything in between. Those 300,000 buildings take up 2.2 billion square feet of space. That's 4 times as much as Walmart has, 10 times as much as GSA. We consume a lot of energy on our installations because of that large footprint. Our bill is about $4 billion a year. It's a lot of electricity. So we care about energy for exactly the 2 reasons that Congressman Forbes teed up. The first is because it can save us a lot of money. $4 billion, even by DOE standards, is a lot of money. And more, yeah. And then the second reason we care is energy security. Our installations perform a lot of critical missions. We fly UAVs, we fly long-range bombers, we analyze data from the battlefield on our permanent installations in the U.S. So there is a blurry line between what's going on in theater and what's going on some of our installations. And those installations are dependent by and large on the commercial electricity grid, and as you know, experts are increasingly concerned that the grid may be vulnerable to major disruption as a result of man-made or natural causes. So for those reasons, installation energy, as opposed to operational energy, is a big deal, and there's a lot of interest in trying to improve our performance. I'm not going to talk today about, we have a very broad strategy. The essence of it is reduce demand through consumption and energy efficiency, and expand the supply of alternative and renewable energy. That's it in a nutshell. And we have a $30 billion MILCON and repair and maintenance budget a year, which we try to use to drive that process, that and a lot of private sector financing, particularly in the renewable area, but not just in that area, to try to make our buildings more energy efficient. So there is a lot that I could say about that, but I want to, because this is a techie group, I want to talk about one particular thing that we're doing, which is our installation energy test bed. And it happens to be the thing that of all the things that we're doing, it's the thing that I am most excited about and have made my highest priority. And the guy who runs it, Jeff Murphy, is here, and I hope will answer the hard questions that again. But it's very, very much in line with the logic laid out in the ITIF paper, that we're a huge consumer of energy. We have a lot of buildings. We can make significant improvements with existing technology to make our buildings more energy efficient, but to make dramatic improvements, we want to draw on some of the new technology that is coming out of industry. But as you know, and as I think Phillip Bernstein may talk about, there's huge impediments to commercialization of that technology. There's always a valley of death between R&D and commercialization. That valley of death is particularly deep in the building industry when it comes to energy technologies, because of the nature of the industry, very fragmented, because of the nature of the energy sector. So it is in a lot of people's, it is in our interest as a large building owner, as a large landlord, to try to overcome those impediments to commercialization of this technology. And we can do that with our installations. So in this area, we don't play an R&D role. There is a tremendous amount of R&D going on in industry, DOE funding, with funding from venture capital. What we can do is play the second of the 2 roles that Matt to talk about the test and validation. We have been doing that on a small scale for 2 years through a formal program that Jeff Marcuson started up. It's out of this dual program, CERTIP and ESTCP. I won't define the acronyms, but it's the Environmental R&D and Test and Evaluation programs in the Department of Defense. He started up the installation energy test that the money is awarded competitively. We have been heavily oversubscribed. He just put out a solicitation a couple of months ago, got in 600 proposals last week, 500 of them from industry. We have about 40 projects going on around the country at installations. We use our installations as a virtual test bed to demonstrate technology. Some of it is very, very cutting edge, and I'll hopefully get a question with Jeff can speak to some of that, but I'm going to just mention one because I can explain it. I worked at OTA, but I'm not a technologist. Building integrated photovoltaic, BIPV. This is a fairly mature technology that's used a lot in the commercial sector, but we don't use it. We don't use it in the Defense Department. We have a lot of roof replacements. This is something that you put on flat roofs. We don't use it because no one has ever collected data on the performance of roofs with BIPV on them. So the Army Corps of Engineers and their Navy counterpart have a program called Roofer, which they turn to figure out what sort of a roof to put on a new building. And Roofer does not have BIPV in it. That is not part of the program. So you will not find BIPV on any Department of Defense roof. So we are now testing BIPV technology on roofs at 3 installations, 2 in Arizona, 1 at Pax River in Maryland, to collect systematic data on the performance of this technology. Jeff is feeding that back to the manufacturer, actually finding some problems with the performance, nothing fundamental, but feeding that back to the manufacturer, very helpful to the manufacturer. They've never gotten this kind of data before. So I think we can play a very valuable role. I would note that Walmart has its own test bed. That's, I think, a validation of the concept, and their test bed for new technologies has been very key to them improving their energy performance in recent years. But Walmart is focused on big box stores, and we have a much broader and more diverse inventory of buildings. So we think this will be very good for us, but we think in being self-interested that we can also play a helpful role, because when these technologies are commercialized, obviously, then they can benefit others. So I'm very excited about this particular aspect of what we're doing.
Great. That's wonderful. Thank you, Director. And I'm sure when we get to questions, we'll get a little more into other issues. Tim.
Thank you. So appreciate being here today. As you know, from the quick introduction, my background is as an operator, not as a technologist. So I appreciate you admitting that as well. Maybe under fire from this group, but I will tell you that operational background, both in the Department of Defense as a very unimpressive career as a soldier, but now in representing the largest business within Microsoft allows me to maintain sort of an operational picture on what it is that we're trying to accomplish. So, you know, with that, it was interesting, you know, in Dean Garfield's opening comments, you know, he talked about, hey, this is not going to be one of the places where we talk and then leave and don't take action. So these are operational issues. If you go back to Congressman Forbes' article they put out last week, he said this isn't an energy efficiency issue. This has become an operational issue. This has become a force protection issue, as mentioned several times. Beyond that, it's a little bit of an international relations issue as well. I will tell you, if you ever want to see up front what our consumption of resources looks like, go to the extreme edge of the battlefield in an austere environment and watch the local population watch us operate. And you'll get some questions that can be very uncomfortable to answer. You know, so with that, we have several reasons triangulating on our requirement to reduce energy. it's an absolute. You know, I will tell you that my mea culpa is, you know, obviously I think with the Department of Defense's reliance on PowerPoint, we maybe have a responsibility right there for about 50% of the problem. The interesting thing there is I actually have a group right now specifically focused on finding efficiencies through that method of communication, and we're with the School of Advanced Military Studies up at Fort Leavenworth, in the E-Ring in the Pentagon, and we're also working in Southwest Asia to actually try to figure that out from a total resources perspective. But the one common theme that I've heard so far goes back to a very consistent military theme. How can we be longer in tooth and shorter in tail? How can we reduce the requirements on the logistics that are absolutely key to the successful outcome of our operational requirements? Now, in representing the largest business inside Microsoft, I try to get my unfair share of the resources. I try to get you know, my much more unfair share of my CEO's time, and making him the executive sponsor of several of the branches of the Department of Defense, where he's been able to maintain that relationship for greater than 20 years now. But also, we roughly, in this fiscal year, doing about $9.5 billion in R&D internal to Microsoft. And the question is, my ability to capture that in both a relevant and efficient manner to those requirements inside and prevalent to the Department of Defense. We're doing a couple ways. We're obviously looking from a policy perspective, you know, what are we trying to accomplish? We've also found from a bottom-up perspective and really focused on the requirements. If you want to find somebody who is extremely interested in reducing the amount of fuel we use, talk to the soldier, sailor, airmen, and Marines that are driving the conflicts. And they are coming up with some really good ideas. And we're trying to factor those into what our responsibility and the solutions that we're delivering from Microsoft into the DoD. Three key areas. One is we're looking at our own use and consumption and how we can improve that. One quick statistic that I was able to capture is that in the last 3 years in our own Microsoft data centers, we've reduced power consumption by 50%. Not an insignificant amount. The second thing we're doing is that we are working with our close partners in the delivery of those solutions, both hardware, services, and other software providers, to ensure that we are exceeding what the Department of Defense and the Energy Star requirements are putting out there, so that from baseline, we're getting better in every iteration. And then lastly, as you look at the innovation and again, the R&D that we're putting into the development of the next generation solutions relevant to the DoD mission and end state, is how can we design that into what we're doing now? I will tell you that this conversation comes up in every single meeting that I have. You know, services, agencies, COCOMs, whether it's a political appointee or whether it's down in a tactical environment. One question is, what do I really own? But the second question usually comes up very quickly is, how can we reduce the resources necessary to operate in the technology environment? So, very much in the forefront of what we're doing. I'm going to be very interested to listen to the questions that you all have, and again, to follow on to Dean's comments earlier, really turn it into the actionable items and have some accountability back to the folks on the panel and you all. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Tim. And Phil.
Well, I want to turn my remarks particularly to some of Dorothy's comments about the issues that DoD is facing around the energy improvement of the performance of their buildings. Our business is very much focused on this problem set for the worldwide building industry, which is a large, intractable group of architects, engineers, and contractors who are, shall we say, less interested in scalable process innovation than they might be. And those process innovations and the kinds of things that I think Dorothy is talking about really operating at a number of different levels that are catalyzed by some of the technologies that we're interested in working on. And I think, Jeff, you observed that you're not going to be able to build your way to this energy solution. And what that means is the problem set here for DoD from the facilities perspective is really a triage of the problem. You have 307,000 buildings, all of which have to be sort of titrated into categories and then strategies built for how to improve the energy performance of those individual entities. And that is a daunting problem, both from a technology perspective and in terms of process methodology. And in our view, those two sets of ideas actually have to be highly correlated. I mean, at some level, our business problem right now is about moving the building industry into the 20th century as opposed to the 21st century, because most of the traditions that buildings are built from, paper drawings and what we affectionately call guys in trucks with dogs, you know, guys who drive their trucks on the job sites and swing hammers, are not very modern, and they don't lend themselves to the kinds of strategic thinking, particularly when it comes to existing buildings, that's necessary to solve this large-scale problem. And so what's interesting about this problem set, and Dorothy and I were talking about earlier, is if DoD can find a way to put a strategy in place that's repeatable, it will very rapidly scale to the entire building industry, which is why there's going to be a lot of attention focused on this. So my argument here, I guess, would be sort of twofold, that the opportunity is actually in two categories. One is around technology methodologies, which is how do you go about looking at 307,000 buildings and rapidly assessing which ones need the most work. You know, when you do energy upgrades on a building, an existing building, the strategy runs everywhere from I just need a caulk gun and some fiberglass, you know, all the way to I need to tear out the entire guts of this building and the infrastructure of this building. And the problem is there's no prima facie way of figuring that out by staring at the building. Now there are technologies available now that allow this kind of assessment relatively rapidly. If we were going to do an energy assessment of this building that we're sitting in right now, we could send a small group of underpaid architects out with digital cameras, and they could take some photographs of this building and use some of our technology to rapidly build a three-dimensional model of that building, and then attach that to a cloud-based energy solutions analysis engine, which would give them an assessment of the energy consumption of this building, and with about 6 to 10 hours worth of work that was 90% accurate. So you very rapidly assess what the problem set is. At the level of an entire installation, you can scale that problem of reality capture to technologies like laser scanning. So you can overfly the base, get a 3D model of the base relatively rapidly, convert those 3D models into lightweight, performative digital models, attach them to analysis engines, and conclude and be able to assess the installation at scale and pick out where the problem children are and where the buildings are that you might be able to leave. And then when you pick out your projects that are the most challenging, the ones that need the most significant infrastructure work, then you can use higher level, high resolution, building information model-based technologies that are actual digital simulations of buildings, behaviorally correct simulations of buildings. All of these technologies exist. You can buy this stuff right now that does all of these things. The reality capture technologies, the modeling technologies, and the analysis technologies. So the methodological problem is actually relatively straightforward. The bigger problem is actually the process problem. The building industry itself, the procurement methodologies, the way designers and contractors and building operators organize themselves is incompatible with these kinds of approaches. Because what we're really talking about here, if the problem is 307,000 buildings, is strategies that are not about traditional procurement ideas about go do this and I'll pay you X amount of money, and if you don't perform, I'll punish you, which is how the whole of the building industry is essentially organized. What you really want is to use these technologies that provide these high-resolution simulations of buildings to predict what outcomes it is as the DoD you're looking for. So if you can structure project teams around these technologies, and your assignment to them is make these buildings perform at like X, and then we will reward you, that is an approach that's simply not possible with old types of methods, contracts, and frankly, digital tools which most of the building industry uses, which generate paper drawings, generate two-dimensional paper drawings. You cannot assess the energy performance or strategize about a building from a drawing. You can, but it's incredibly inefficient and slow and inaccurate. If you're going to make this transition to these technologies that rapidly capture existing conditions, which is essentially the problem, translate those existing conditions into simulations that you can then reason about, and then overlay that with new procurement strategies that are about outcome-based performance, then you can operate at the scale of 307,000 buildings. I mean, I think it's interesting, Dorothy, that you use the example of Walmart, because we've been talking to those guys as well, and they are looking very comprehensively at both the performance of their buildings and their supply chain management, and trying to lock those two ideas together. And I guess I'm supposed to be up here pitching how great all of our simulation technology is. I don't really actually think that's the issue. We have all the toys you need to do this stuff. There's plenty of toys out there that are commercially available. What's needed is repeatable methodologies, workflows that lock those toys together. Because the real problem, what you really need to do is wave your magic wand and stack rank your 307,000 buildings from the smallest problems to the largest problems. And our view of that is that the simulation and data collection technologies are available to do that. There's a more interesting methodological test bed that needs to be invented.
Great, thank you. A couple of quick things. One, I think we've probably set a record here today with a presentation with DoD officials and about DoD that didn't use PowerPoint. I've never seen one.
That's not okay.
I feel pretty good about it.
We could do more than that. The second point, I just wanted to echo a little bit what Phil said. I had the pleasure a couple of years ago in Detroit, saw a presentation of this technology. It's just, we should have brought it. Too bad. It's a little camera that kind of just stands here. It's a little laser. It's not it's a laser thing, and it shoots out laser images. And it's like what, 10,000 a second?
Well, they're much faster and cheaper.
100,000 million a second laser pulses that go out, and they can make a 3D computer-aided design CAD model of this room with just in a couple of minutes.
But interestingly, that technology is now sort of moved down the food chain to digital cameras. You can take a digital camera like your iPhone. Take 5 photos.
Not iPhone.
Sorry. Your Windows phone. And our stuff all runs on their stuff. So you don't even need a laser scanning crew. These guys have all kinds of fun toys. They can overfly the sites and laser scan them if they want. But if they want to do some kind of digital camera, that works too.
No, it's amazing technology and how what you can do in it. So we have a fair amount of time for questions. So if you want to ask a question or make a comment, you raise your hand and first identify yourself and to a particular person. Right here, sir.
I'm Larry Sandwich, White's Engineering Laboratories. I just have a question about cybersecurity. Could someone speak to what DoD is doing in terms of cybersecurity and electric grid?
There's a very large group of people, including a whole new military command, that is in charge of that can speak to it better than we can. But we are certainly, both Dorothy Romine and I are involved in an electric grid security working group, along with our colleague Paul Stockton, who's the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense. And it's certainly something that we are looking at and working on in collaboration with the community of experts and folks who have responsibility for those issues. So believe me, it's a very strong interest, and particularly when we're talking about the electric grid.
I would just add, I think we are working with other federal agencies to try to figure out how serious the threat is. That's not really where our expertise is. What we're really focused on, what Sharon and I are focused on, is trying to identify the critical missions that we carry out, and how do we ensure that they could continue if the grid were to go down. That gets us heavily into the microgrid area, which is one of the focus areas for our test bed. So that if something were to happen, so that you could island not the entire installation, but critical activities. And obviously renewable and energy storage become very important to that. So we're working, both of our offices are working with RPE on storage technologies that would be very, go along with improving our energy security.
And I should clarify that cybersecurity in the sense of military operations is one thing. What we're looking at is the department as a business, really, as a landholder, and as the way that we do business. That's our piece of it, and we have, I think, an important voice in the interagency discussion about that as well, and particularly since we have an important role to play in support of civil authorities, and DOE is in the lead on this along with BHS, but we, as a landholder and a business, and as an important player in the interagency, do play a role in that conversation as well.
Also, Dorothy, you raised the point about RB, but I assume most of you know that it's the Advanced Research Project Agency in Energy in the Department of Energy, created 4 or 5 years ago, modeled after DARPA and all the success they had. Can you say a little more, either of you, about that relationship and how, what do you mean by that relationship? Are you involved in project selection or transfer of the research results?
Here, let me speak to the installation piece. First of all, I think RPE is a tremendous program. Arun Majumdar, the head of RPE, who comes out of Lawrence Berkeley Lab, was a colleague of Stephen Chu, was actually in charge of the building department at Lawrence Berkeley Lab. So he brings a real appreciation for the energy problems related to buildings, and he has assembled an amazing team of the most entrepreneurial group of federal employees that you will find anywhere except perhaps DARPA. And they have a number of focus areas. Like DARPA, their work is, they are working on things that are fairly far out. We can be a demonstration site, and they are interested in that for those technologies. But I think in the storage area, the role that we're trying to play is our needs for storage might be a little bit different than those of utilities, and we can actually have some influence on the R&D path that RPE is taking. And so I don't think our interests are inconsistent with those of utilities, but it may be possible for technologies to solve our storage needs before they've gotten to the point of solving utilities. So we are an earlier off-ramp for storage technologies. So that the piece that Jeff can say more about the technology, but it's an area that we selected because we think our needs can actually affect the R&D pathway that RPE is taking. We work very closely with DOE collectively, EERE, Energy Efficiency, Renewable Energy, that office. That's probably our closest collaboration. They have a whole building department headed up by a guy named Roland Rizzer, who they recruited from PG&E in California, and who's tremendous. So it's a very, very collaborative relationship, and we regularly go to the RPE happy hour on Friday nights, which had become sort of a gathering place for anybody interested in energy policy issues, including ex-APA.
We have a new memorandum of understanding between the Department of Energy and the Department of Defense, and that's the sort of chapeau for this, where we're trying to orchestrate and sort of roll up that collaboration and streamline it. And Mike Smith is here, is one of the participants in that, and his boss, Assistant Secretary of Energy, Patricia Hoffman, in the Electricity Reliability Office, is our partner there in that, but we're also working with all the military departments to use this MOU to kind of bring some strategic direction to the collaboration and ease it where it needs to be eased. And the ARPA-E DoD partnership is under that MOU, and we've identified several projects specifically where both where ARPA-E's developments that they're doing, again, for their own reasons, look attractive to DoD, and we've agreed to do a couple of joint efforts where both institutions are putting money and people against the effort. And again, these all collaborate with the private sector as well.
Just, back when I was at OTA and we were writing about technology policy, and the DOE's weakness was that it was all technology push from the labs. There wasn't much demand pull. And DOD's strength historically has been, as Matt said, it's been the self-contained nature of it, that you've had the demand pull coming from the services and the components. I think Stephen Chu figured out very quickly that he wanted us to provide that demand pull, and so Arun Majumdar came to see me, head of RPE, his first week on the job, because he was interested in the role that we could play, and he's talked to a lot of us, and part of this close relationship. It's all about having DOE needs provide the demand pull that has been missing too often in DOE.
Great. I'll take that opportunity also to advertise a great paper that Matt Horan just released for us last week, which is on our website, on the history of technological innovations throughout the last 100 years and the relationship between demand pull and technology push, and the relationship also with price. So a very interesting background paper with a lot of analogies to energy. It's exactly, really glad to hear this because it's this sort of smart relationship between the research component of push and the demand, because you can do research that's not related, but you can also frankly do kind of dumb demand that's sort of not pulling real innovation. Putting those two together in the right way is just fantastic. So go right here.
Steve Ozer, Pareto Energy. I want to address some issues which Ms. Robin and Mr. Bernstein mentioned in terms of microgrids. Very little in the way of the common literature addresses microgrids as a solution, and perhaps DOD is already doing some programs in microgrids. But one of the other issues is the interrelationship with the utility companies and the way the processes involved in procuring microgrids as they are different from the standard operating procedures of the DOD and the DOE currently, and how DOD is currently addressing those issues with microgrids and with the way microgrids are procured.
Well, I think he's
Okay.
asking you how you want to do this.
And
I'll see if I can help.
I don't know that I can't definitely, I'll call on Jeff to talk on the technology side of the microgrid area. And this is sort of a new, I'm learning about the economics and the politics of the relationship between the microgrid developers and the utilities. I think we're still figuring that out. I meet, and my service counterparts and I meet on a pretty regular basis with a group of CEOs from Edison Electric, the investor-owned utilities, and that's one of the issues that we're looking at is how one does that. As you imply, there's been a tension between the folks promoting the microgrids and the utilities, and I think it's analogous to what we've seen in other sectors. And so I don't know that we have I think we're still figuring that out, particularly how you interface with the utilities. Jeff, do you want to?
No, I'll just add something too. There's also a tactical application for microgrids, and we actually have one that's en route to Afghanistan right now. And because if you look at it from the St. Bagram Air Force Base, it has 50 megawatts of capacity, and it's all spot generation. So it's a very different problem than challenge, and where microgrids could be very useful. And that particular one, to answer your question about procurement and how we selected, there was a 3-year joint capabilities technology demonstration at Fort Irwin, which is where the Army does a lot of very important pre-deployment training, and they've tested a number of different technologies there in that operational environment, including several different microgrid technologies. So that was a process where we spent 3 years looking at different vendors through an open process, a competitive process, and tested them, and they had to be proven and tried and true, and that's one of the ones that's going over now.
Yeah, you want to use the mic?
Sure. I'm Jeff Marcus.
This is our test bed.
But your point on the issues of the microgrid and the local utility is spot on. And in fact, when we think about demonstration and testing of technology, specifically microgrids, it's a broad sense. It's not just about understanding the hardware, software solutions that might actually, keep the microgrid stable or allow you to do economically smart things. We also have to demonstrate how we do this in the context of the PUC and the local utility. And in fact, our installations are a very mixed set of situations. We have a significant amount of privatized distribution systems, privatized generation capacity, and so we don't have an answer at this point, but as we do these demonstrations, part of the goal is to learn what are the barriers, what are the solutions. They will be site-specific in the sense that under one PUC, But hopefully after we do a number of these, we will have enough experience to be able to take them to scale and not have to do this experiment at every installation at every stage.
You know, that example sort of reinforces Schumpeter's advice or comment 50 years ago on innovation, that effective innovation is about creative destruction. And I think we forget about that oftentimes. We just sort of think it's just about technology, somehow magically it gets adopted. And I think this is a good example of that, where we could wait a long, long time for utilities to do microgrids on their own, because they really don't have a big incentive to transform the business model. In fact, perhaps have negative incentives. And so it's a good example where it's in your interest to do microgrids, and because of that, can be help you may lead that transformation. It might not occur otherwise because of resistance in the marketplace. I think there was a question here.
Good morning, it's Dan Nolan from Sable 6. And I wanted to ask a question, brought up some great points, Ms. Burke, on the great stuff that's going out from the JCTD at the NGC, what the Expeditionary Energy Office, the Marine Corps is doing. But those, what the Marine Corps set up is a physical office where there's a guy in uniform who's got a responsibility to do that. The Army used to have a group called Power Surety Task Force that had responsibility for implementing. Great policy being written, but is there an intent to have organizations that can do the implementation? I did know about your innovation process, well, it sounds very interesting, but is there an intent to create those organizations in a current atmosphere where DoD in many places is drawing down?
Thanks, Dan, and well aware of the great work you did, particularly on the Marine Corps assessment team, where they actually sent a team, and Dan was on it, out to Afghanistan to look at how energy was actually being used. And that is one of our challenges, is that we don't have very good data on actual energy use at the point of consumption. And it's very difficult to manage what you can't measure, and it's difficult to target our efforts appropriately. So that was a very important effort, and we need to do more of that. As far as you know, the Power Surety Task Force was established by the Army, but then they gave it up and transitioned it and sort of ruined it a little bit. But I think it's a very important model. And it's also the rationale behind the technology demonstration program, that we need to have a way to test and look at technologies for deployment use before they go. And we do have a big infrastructure for doing that in the military labs, and they are expert in doing that. And I think it's a question of lining up what we need with the capacity we have to test. And that is one of the reasons that I've been asked to establish an innovation fund, is to accomplish that goal. And of course, one of the things the Power Surety Task Force did so well was they also had the advocates who then made sure these things were getting adopted. Now, they weren't fully institutionalized, so it made it hard for them to do that. And that's the other piece of the link that we want to put in place. As well as putting a contract authority in there that makes it easier. Because that's one thing we hear consistently, that I'm sure Dorothy hears all the time too, that DoD is a hard place to do business with. And there are good reasons for that, but also we need to make it easier if we're going to be able to reach a broader range of innovators. So yeah, we are figuring out how to do that. And I think your implicit point too, that it also has to be seated in the services, because they have to own it. And they're the ones that have the Title X, the legal authority to man, train, and equip. So we are trying to work with our partners in the services to make sure that they're setting up a parallel capacity to do this as well. So no, it's a very good point, and it has to happen.
Yes, sir.
Also for Secretary Burke, Michael Bagley from the Ocean Group. You had a couple quotes. Michael Bagley from the Ocean Group. Sorry. I think you said 50 million gallons a month of jet fuel in Afghanistan. Is that correct? 50? From your quotes.
Right now.
Okay. And $10 to $50 a gallon is the.
No, that's only at the tactical edge. In certain circumstances, it's not always that. It's actually $3.03 a gallon is the standard price for fuel. What I was talking about, that's not the price for fuel.
Sure.
That's when you add in force protection and logistics assets to that farthest point, it can cost that much. So not every gallon of fuel is costing us that much, and in fact, the price of every gallon of fuel is $3.03.
Understood. Question is, going forward, the camelina-based blended fuels tests are going quite well, obviously. Going forward, is there a strategy for camelina-based blended fuels and other biofuels delivered to military forces, aviation, if you will, from theater of operations as opposed to domestically? And if there's no strategy, how can private industry help?
To also clarify, jet fuel doesn't mean it's all for jets. It's the standard for tactical reasons, fuel on the battlefield. So we do try to use it. There are other fuels that we do supply on the battlefield, but that's for tactical advantages. For strategic reasons, we want to have a single fuel. Camelina-based fuels. So one of the problems that we're seeing right now is a volume of fuel question. And it's the amount of fuel we're having to use through the battle space that's a problem. It's a problem for us strategically. When you move that amount of cargo constantly through a ground line of communication in Pakistan or through Central Asia, that it causes strategic problems and tactical problems, force protection problems. Just moving that amount of fuel through the battle space, it's a challenge for us. And again, the way that we disperse forces now, and this is going to be true of all of our forces, the way that we organize, the way that we fight, this is going to be a problem. Our supply lines are going to be vulnerable. So that's one problem, or one challenge that we need to address. And swapping one liquid fuel for another does not answer that problem. So on the one hand, the Camelina trials, which are very interesting, are about our long-term access to fuel. That we need to make sure. Camelina is a biomass crop that the Air Force and that actually all the military departments have tested that and a number of other feedstocks to see that they blend with jet fuel up to 50% blend to see if our equipment and our weapons platforms can operate on it. And so far we've had a number of very successful tests. And again, that's about long-term fuel security. But we take your point in that for military operations, we do procure our fuel regionally or locally as close to the fight as possible, both to cut the mission risk, cut the costs. It supports our people better. So we're always going to be looking to buy fuel as close to the fight as possible when you're talking about a military operation. And I think for biofuels and for other alternative fuels, the goal again is for us to be able to use whatever we can to get our mission done. And down the line in the future, of course, that would be a consideration. As to what industry can do, industry can, we're a big consumer, but we're still only 1% of overall national energy demand and 2% when it comes to liquid fuels. So we can't create that industry alone, and we need partners. And we need the commercial sector to also work to develop alternative fuels. So we do need industry to step up and work on this as well and make these fuels technologically feasible and affordable. And I know the Navy's taking a lead role in this and trying to develop it. So, but yes, ultimately, a lot of our fuel use is at home, and so industries that are based in the United States would be of interest. But for our operational energy security, where our need is and our requirement is, we are going to need to procure fuels as regionally and locally as possible, and it'll continue to be a priority.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Telson with General Atomics. Question for either Dorothy or Sharon. This is the typical problem in these investment decisions to get cheaper costs over the future is, of course, getting the money up front. And that's, of course, getting increasingly difficult, particularly in the next couple of years. So my question really is I know over the years we've developed a number of creative ways of being able to do the financing. I suspect we need even more new ways to do it. My question really is do you think you have adequate authorities at the present time? Your answer is probably yes. But are you thinking about other authorities that you might need? And is there any conversation about what those authorities might be?
I think we're in a better situation than other federal agencies. And first of all, let me say yes, third-party financing, absolutely critical. It is now the way we do renewable projects. So Nellis Air Force Base, 14 megawatt solar array, third-party financing. That's true of the big utility scale renewable projects. ESCOs, energy savings companies, Honeywell, Johnson Controls, and there's a lot of those in that space. They pay for to recapitalize, to make certain capital improvements, energy savings improvements, no money down on the federal government's part. They're paid out of the savings that we get in our utility bill, utility energy savings contracts. There's a variety of mechanisms out there. You know, it seems, I mean, in theory, it seems like we're in a good situation. We have the ability to power purchase agreements over longer than a 10-year period, which no other federal agency does, and we've been exercising that. But when I meet with companies, it's not unusual for me to hear that, well, at a particular installation, they're telling us that we can't do such and such. And so we are trying to systematically take each of the third-party financing mechanisms and figure out what ground truth is, and is there an impediment? Is it the lawyers or is it the law? One is,
always blame the lawyers.
It's usually, yeah, that's a good starting point. Maybe. I will say one thing that was very helpful with ARA funding, we could mix appropriated funds and funds from ESCOs, energy savings companies. And I think that was very helpful. And I think there is, I think we can't do that, or at least there's a perception that we can't do that normally. So that's, I think that's an issue. While I'm on the subject of ESCOs, are you all familiar, is that familiar to energy savings? Because it's a very powerful idea that has been around for a while. And but I think I want to make a point about it that Jeff often makes, and it's something that we need to figure out how to solve. ESCOs make their money by minimizing their risk. They have to figure out, they have to be absolutely certain what the returns they're going to get from installing this new equipment and putting in daylighting or whatever. And so the technology that they use is low-risk technology. Honeywell, Johnson Control, Honeywell, for example, is doing a lot of really interesting R&D in this space, but the ESCO part of Honeywell is not using that innovative Honeywell technology. They're using something off the shelf that's low risk. We want to be forward-leaning, the same reason we want to make ourselves available as a test bed. When we do ESCO sorts of arrangements, we would prefer to take a little bit of risk, and that isn't the way it works. So we are talking with individual ESCOs in this group about how do we do that? Do we buy down that risk? Do we pay for it? You know, how exactly do we tackle that problem? I think that's a real, I'm not sure it requires a statutory fix, but I think it's a real problem.
I know that just from a business perspective, trying to answer part of your question too, because I think you're spot on, and to really get down to distill it down to how that's impacting us from a business is that when Secretary Gates got up and said, hey, we're going to cut, $100+ billion out of the budget, he got our attention, right? He got our attention very quickly. Not on a 5-year P&L, but like on a 4-quarter P&L. And very consistent, not just from an enterprise software perspective, but from my peers across the business industry and the Department of Defense. We very quickly came up with, hey, there's three components. If we don't address these now, those being consolidation, security, and cost reduction, back to your cyber question earlier, if you don't hit those 3 components right now, your business goes away. It just doesn't survive. And so as we get through figuring out through both the legal side and the policy side how to address it, I can tell you that the business reaction has been immediate and I think very positive, but definitely got the reaction I think that was they're looking for from industry.
I think we have time for one more question, and then I'm going to ask the last one. So yes, sir.
Hi, Brendan Peter from CA Technologies, used to be called Computer Associates. I want to follow up on some comments that Ms. Burke and also Mr. Bernstein made and ask a question, I guess, generally to Dr. Robon and Ms. Burke about what you're doing to measure and then triage and then evaluate how you're making investments and whether they're performing. Certainly interested in where you're at today. The stimulus bill did certainly also have a lot of funding for retrofits and investments to make your installations smarter and more efficient. But what are you doing to collect in real time that type of data and then aggregate it to do the types of things that Mr. Bernstein mentioned about evaluating the relative success of investments you're making and then triaging your facilities or your operations to understand where we can make the smartest investment decisions and base that on realistic, real-time data that you're gathering from across your incredibly large portfolio?
Well, I think, let me give you a two-part answer. I think we do a terrible job of metering. We do a terrible job of metering. My office has put out some policy that will require metering that will lower the bar for where you have to meter. It's variable across the services. The Navy is, when they finish their metering project, they will have metered 98% of all their energy consumption. The Army, by contrast, their threshold is buildings that are 29,000 square feet. So anything under that, they don't currently meter, and that's some really big buildings. So we don't do, this is Jeff continually complains about our data. So just in our day-to-day performance, in terms of the test bed, of course, everything we're doing there is that is all about very carefully documenting and measuring, but also it's one of the focus areas is the development of technologies that will allow you to better make better decisions about how you allocate your money, which is a slightly different thing. Now, there may be I think that Phil and I agree 98%, but I'm not sure that Jeff would agree, and maybe Jeff can speak to this, that the technology exists that allows us to know exactly how to set the baseline. I mean, we can't really tell how this stuff is doing without good baseline data. Jeff's comments suggest that the technology exists to do that, and I don't know that Jeff totally agrees with that.
Well, I would agree 98%, probably 99%, is what I agree with most people.
I'll take that credit.
I think the challenge, and you alluded to it, is to do it at scale.
Exactly.
Right. I think we have the component, the pieces, but it is the process and the linkage to do at scale. I mean, and I think it's not only for the investment, but for the operation of our building. And we have, in the world, the U.S., we have proof points of high efficiency buildings. The problem is they're usually, have some very wealthy donor's name on them. Okay, that's not translatable to 300,000 buildings, many of which either no one wants their name on because they're not very attractive buildings. So how do you? I think there's a technology issue in the broad sense of technology of taking to scale information that allows you to make smart investments, information that allows you to make smart operational decisions on how the building on a day-to-day operates.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to say that I think that this is an issue that operates not just at the kind of gross level of how the building performs or even what energy is coming in through the meter. But after you've done your triage and you've decided what your strategy is and you've executed against a given building, then you have the problem figuring out whether it actually worked. And we just finished a LEED Platinum corporate headquarters for our group. We designed it with all the latest technologies. It's got Johnson controls up the wazoo. And we're trying to figure out why we're using so much energy right now. So we were building some technology that connects the Johnson control system to our original simulation models to try to figure out exactly what's going on. Now, part of it's obvious, right? I can walk on the floor of our building and see some guy who's got 4 21-inch monitors on his desk, right? So some of it's easy, but some of it's miscommissioning and the air handlers aren't working properly, and it's actually a pretty subtle problem. So if you can't bridge from that kind of gross, I think the building should baseline at X, so I'm going to do Y, and then when the building actually operates, if you can't connect those dots, then you haven't actually solved the problem. And that piece is the 2% that we would probably agree is not working right now.
Yeah, and it just, the simple way to think about this is, if you look at 100,000 buildings and you're having a $4 billion a year energy bill, it's divided among those 100,000 buildings. And if it costs me, tens to hundreds of thousands of detailed commissioning money and auditing money and design money to save tens of thousands of dollars for every building, you don't get a payback. So that's one of the technical challenges, is we know the savings are there, but how to find them efficiently and sustain them, not just for the quarter, but for the next decade, because facilities continually decline in their performance.
And if this methodology doesn't get to scale, then you won't get those economic advantages.
I think in the operational area, there's a saying in the military that no plan survives first contact with reality. And I think coming into this job, what I thought was going to be my top priorities and most important things I needed to do, I was surprised what I found I really needed to do. And one of them is data collection. Because energy we use for operations is not something that, as an institution, we've thought about as a capability or as a separate area, we don't have good information. We have fuel sales data, and you know, for example, in Afghanistan, it's at the point of sale. After that, we don't know what happens to it. And we've had to rely on, not enough, actually, of the kinds of things that the Marines did where they went in and assessed. Because again, we know we have a challenge, but it's very difficult to say exactly what it looks like. And the Army did a very interesting study where they compared all of the studies. And when it looked at how we're using energy use in theater, one of the studies said 80% is going to generators, one said 40%, one said 50%, one said 20%. I mean, I tell you now that airplanes use a lot of fuel, and so do vehicles, so 80% is not very credible of total energy use going to generators. But we don't know. So that's become a high priority for the office. It's a different problem technologically as far as collecting data. And what we're finding is that some of the data is actually there, but nobody's really asked for it for these purposes. We just found out that the Army has been putting black boxes on tactical vehicles and collecting data on operational performance, which is really important, especially since we're looking at buying smaller vehicles. But nobody knew that because they were doing it for their own purposes, for other purposes. Saying the Army's putting a tactical fuels manager in place in Afghanistan, which was really to try to control pilferage of fuel, which has been a huge problem, but it also can be used to measure energy use and what's consuming. All of the pilot projects we're doing, we're incorporating data logging into it. I've talked to your colleagues at Microsoft, and they feel that we probably have the data available more than we think we do, but no one's pulling it down or pulling it out, and no one's analyzing it. So that's become a really important focus for me, is to figure out what we have that we don't know we have, or it's not being used for these purposes, and where we actually need to be measuring and metering. For the purposes of operations, it doesn't necessarily need to be comprehensive, but we do need representatives so that we can get a better sense of where we can actually improve our operations. So it's a really important area for us.
So let me just ask you, Sharon and Dorothy, one hopefully very quick question, quick answer, maybe 30-second answer. If you could wave a magic wand and to develop a technology that you think would be the most important thing for what your mission is as an individual in DoD, what would it be in 10 years? What's kind of the core technology piece that you think would really make your ability to carry out your mission effectively?
Yes. You said quick.
No, the answer is plastics.
Some of the younger people in the room have no idea.
I'll make a very quick answer because I think Dorothy will have will probably be able to answer your question. For me, I'm going to duck it because I think it's putting the emphasis in the wrong place when you're talking about military operations, in that we can't afford to be path dependent when it comes to innovation. We need to say, this is what we need to be able to do, and then let innovation come to us. So I think it's very important in the operations space not to get path dependent. And what I would say instead is we're going to continue to need a military that can be expeditionary, that can be light, that can be rapidly deployed all over the world, that's going to be able to integrate information operations thoroughly and securely, and including from home station in a way that's going to be secure. That we need to be able to do all of those things, and that implies different kinds of energy than we currently use. And you know, certainly I could give you a snapshot in time of what we like right now, but it's more that we need to be able to do those things going forward. And whatever is going to help us do that is what we want to see.
You can duck it too.
Well, yeah, I asked Jeff, I would say, I'm trying to anticipate what he would say is probably how you actually operate buildings. I mean, presumably by then there'll be a lot of neat stuff, so we build them better, but we do a lousy job of operating them and the whole continuous building commissioning. Yeah, why don't I just...
I mean, actually, I think the energy space isn't solvable by a technology. It really is a variety of things. I mean, I think if you think about it, we've got to think about how innovation can exploit information and get linked to investment. That's sort of, and that's going to need a lot of different underlying technologies. I mean, so that could be everything from meters to storage to better component to better modeling to better ways to feed models. But it's that linkage of, feeding off of information. I mean, you said, or someone said the building industry had to hit the 20th century. If God forbid, the building industry, recognized it was an IT revolution, we'd be so much further along. And that's sort of one of the things we have to do.
Yeah, I can't actually overestimate that enough. The building industry is sort of one of those few, it's sort of like healthcare in a way, probably worse though, that hasn't figured out the digital revolution. Although I do have a little device at home that lets me have a laser when I want to measure the level. That's advancing.
They do have microwave ovens in the job trailers now.
Is that for the beer?
That's for the beer. The dog, yeah.
Dog. So on that happy note, this was really a great panel, and I particularly want to thank Dorothy and Sharon for, I know your schedule is so busy, and really taking time out to educate us all, and also Jeff and Tim and Phil and Matt. And, for those of you who really think this was so great and want to hear it again, it's going to be on our website. So if you have colleagues who you think would be interested in it, it's posted on our website tomorrow, which is like 10 after work. So please join me in thanking a great panel.